So, thank you very much. And let's get started today. We are talking today about the 10 differences between uh, traditional and enterprise risk management. Now, before we get started, I do want to say a couple things. One, I'm not the kind of person that's going to give you the 5 minutes of introduction of myself. Uh, for a lot of you that are here, you already know me from LinkedIn, from my blog, Strategic Decision Solutions, where we've been providing ERM and strategic guidance to people for 8 years now. Next month, I'm really excited about that. So we have our blog, but we are a strategic advisory and enterprise risk management advisory firm where we focus on helping insurance companies, but we do work with others. Love doing it, but we do think out of the box. So it's me. You have my website if you need it. But let's go ahead and jump in. Started. So, and by the way, if there is anything that you need to share with me, just drop it in the Q&A. I know the chat is disabled, but I've got Enrique and Sarah that are going to be monitoring and helping as well. So let's get in. The traditional risk management. Let me define the two for everybody that's here. So I think of traditional risk management as two areas. One is going to be your insurance focused risk management, very insurable, right? Very been around for hundreds of years. But there's also a second component, and that is really the way that ERM started 15, even 10 years ago for some companies, very risk focused, right? The way that I think of enterprise risk management is really going to be thinking about those risks that truly affect the organization as a whole. Those things that are really they could prevent you from achieving the objectives and the outcomes that you are wanting. Um, so we're not really focused on avoiding risks and preventing failure. We're really focusing on achieving goals, increasing the confidence of success. That's what we are about. Okay. So now that we have that definition in hand, I want a quick question. Now, okay, so the chat's disabled, so we're going to use the Q&A function on this one, but don't hit enter until I say please. All right, two questions. One, type in there on a scale of 1 to 5, what level of maturity would you say that your ERM program is? So one's like you're barely beginning or non-existent. You can put a 0 if it's non-existent. To a 5 as we've been doing this for a long time. We've got all this activities that are fully embedded. It is just part of our day to day. We don't even think about it. In fact, ERM is just handled by everybody within the company because it's just part of our day to day. Think about it from that perspective, scale of 1 to 5. Then put a comma. And then tell me how many years of experience in enterprise risk management do you have as an individual? All right, share that with me. That helps me get this nice little gauge here. All right, so we got some people coming in at on the lower end. Okay, so on the 2s, we've got some people that said they're 5 on maturity. Okay, so but a lot of people are saying more on the 2 or even on the NA. So very beginning 1. But we have definitely a range of experience. We've got people that have no experience in ERM, and I saw some people with 15, 20 years of experience. This is fantastic. So we have a wide range of people. The fact that we're all still interested in learning about this is the key here, right? So one of the elements that I typically focus on is that one of the skill sets, soft skills for an enterprise risk management practitioner is you have to always have a learning mindset. So you always have to be willing to go out and find out what is going on. I want to learn something new because you know what? Maybe the way that I've thought about it for all these years, maybe that's changed. I know I can raise my hand on that one because I used to be that person who practiced what I labeled as traditional risk management, right? Very risk centric, very risk focused, and having the list of risks. All right. So thank you guys so much for that. Man, you guys are awesome. All right. So we've got 10 differences here. Good stuff. Now, here's the cool thing is that this whole conversation, the next, I'm going to say 45 minutes, is going to be directed by you all. I'm not just going to sit here and talk for the next 45 minutes about just the next 10. I want to hear from you all. Which one of these would you like for me to talk about? Or if you don't want me to talk about any of these and you just want to ask questions, I am up for that. So you just drop it in the Q&A. What questions do you have? And if you want me to talk about one of these, just write down which one it is and I will start diving in. But this is a webinar for you all, that learning mindset, right? I got somebody who says, wants me to cover them all. I totally get that. Anybody else? Okay. So, all right. So reactive versus proactive. Yeah, we can dive into that. And then I saw another one about tools. So we'll talk about tools as well. Okay, so reactive versus proactive. So the difference here is going to be, I think of this as reactive is you're looking in the rearview mirror, right? Think about when you're driving, you look in the rearview mirror, you're focused on what's already happened and you're looking there instead of thinking about, well, what's in front of us? What could keep us in the future that we haven't experienced? We have no idea what's coming and we've got to gauge the land. That's more your proactive, right? So reactive and thinking about, as an example, very incident focused, very issue focused, very, man, this is something that we experience every single year. This needs to be on the risk list. We know that this is a possibility because we've seen hints of it happening at our competitors. So we don't want to be caught in the same boat. Now, some of that is being proactive, but it's already being experienced, which increases the odds of it happening at your company. But you react to the circumstances that are in front of you, as opposed to proactive is you're looking not just a couple months down the road, you're looking several years down the road and saying, we have these things that we want to accomplish. What are the things that could throw us off track? What are the things that could really divert us or totally block us from achieving something? And the second part of that is if there's something that we can't do to necessarily reduce the risk or, those types of things, how can we go ahead and plan how to respond when it does happen? Or maybe I should say, if it happens, right? So you really have a response plan already crafted for in the event that it does happen. So future facing versus rear facing. Great option. Okay, so let's talk about tools. Let me go back over here. So from a tools perspective, and then I'm going to talk about documentation versus decision focus. Okay. So tools, free tools, depends on how good you want it to be. There are a wide range of tools. Now, if you're talking software to support data management and being able to do good analysis and reporting, you do have from more of a quantifiable, you do have Excel add-ons, that type of thing. But even from a ERM software perspective, you do have a range in prices and sophistication. So and just so you guys know, very clear disclaimer, I get no kickbacks or any fees for any mention of any specific companies. I know of a lot of companies. I don't have a list of them right next to my computer though, so it's not going to be all inclusive. However, I know several companies that focus on those that are just starting their ERM program. One of those, as an example, would be Tracker Networks has one called Essential ERM, and it's good for those that are literally just need the essentials to get going. You have ones that are more robust and can do more full featured, such as origami GRC. You've got IdeaGen that has multiple functions. It's more performance management software, right? That incorporates risk. Then you go all the way over to the other side where you've got your logic managers, your sword, your archer, excuse me, your archer, those types of things. So you have a wide range, right, of tools. So hopefully that helps, but you have to find the one that works best for you. But what you don't want to be sure of, don't pick a software that drives how you practice ERM at your company. Figure out how you need to practice ERM at your company, then find the tool that supports those practices, and we'll continue supporting it going into the future. Great question, and that is always a tricky one. Thank you so much, Christine. Okay, so let's dive into the documentation and decision focus. This is definitely an area that is a big difference. So, with this, the documentation, it's all about having, I kind of consider it the CYA, as well as, you're not actually helping make decisions. You're kind of coming in after the fact, or you're strictly doing the information gather of stuff that people already know about. You're not providing any new insights. You're strictly information gathering, compiling, reporting. And typically the reaction that you get when you do the documentation is, okay, thanks so much, and move on to the next agenda item when your leadership sees it. How you can tell it's not just documentation, but you're really helping them make decisions is you're able to ask questions on the fly in the middle of a conversation where they're having to make a decision, right? And those questions can be very risk focused. They can be, okay, so we have this goal. What are we relying on being in place for us to be able to achieve this? What assumptions are we making? What are there any dependencies that we've got on other projects that we're working on, or any external resources? Because any answers that you could get to those three questions could identify risks, right? But you're getting the management and the people that you're talking to stop and slow down in the decision making a little bit. You're not saying no, you're giving more information to help inform their decision making. So when they say, well, yeah, we're expecting this tool to be in place for us to be able to roll out this new product to the market. So if the tool isn't in place by X date, what would that mean to us being able to roll this out within the time frame that we're expecting, right? Because now you've just identified a risk. So that's where the difference is between strictly the documentation of, here's our top list of risks. They're all well known to the company. They document, these are things that we're doing, nothing new, versus being able to ask those on the fly decisions. The other aspect of this is you're very focused on outcomes and objectives. You have a purpose. Doesn't have to be a strategic objective. Let me be very, very clear about that. It could be a business objective, because every organization should have a mission, right? Which is your purpose of the company existing. And every department has a purpose for why that department exists. So what is the purpose of that department? That is their objective, what they are there to achieve. Great. What could keep you from achieving that objective? Okay, well then let's make sure that we increase your ability and your confidence in achieving that objective. So you're helping them allocate resources, possibly reallocate resources, right? If they've been allocating a ton of resources to this thing over here that, in reality, it's not needed as much as it has in the past. Let's shift that and put them on this instead. Or, people, I had, as an example, I had a conversation with someone, another ERM practitioner, and he was talking to a department head, and he said, what are the top 5 risks to your department being able to achieve its purpose? And he listed off a few, and the ERM practitioner asked him, so what about like dependency on, longtime employees? And he goes, actually, that is not a risk for us. I didn't even come to mind, because in reality, sometimes those employees require more resources because they're not used to the way that we're doing things now. So it takes time to get whatever they're doing acclimated over. And to be honest, we might be okay to help them exit, because in a way they kind of hold us back from being able to truly transition to this new way of doing things. So different ways of looking at it, right? All right. So I have a very interesting question, and it is, where do you even start to build an ERM program when the company is risk averse and slow to make changes? So I would probably start it off with the question of, I get that there are some companies that are more risk averse than others, but you can't be risk averse in everything. Otherwise, the company won't exist for very long, right? So you can probably start by just asking them the question of, if there was an area where you would take a little bit more risk than others, where would that be? What would that look like, right? One of the big elements that I found is, if let's not use a bunch of the fancy ERM terminology that we hear so much about, risk appetite, risk tolerance, and really getting into that likelihood and all that. Use the day-to-day business language. Don't feel like you have to educate them on ERM, but we translate to the business, and it gets them going. So, and even experienced practitioners, we have to remind ourselves about that. Even myself, I have to remind myself about that sometimes, because I get into a groove. So that would be one of it. And slow to make changes would be finding out, where are they hurting the most, right? What are the biggest pain points for them? Because that they will feel the most relief from. So see, hope that helps. That element, because that could drive the elements around, where would they be willing to take a little bit more risk, and what would that look like, so that you can start. But then I would also link it back to their goals and objectives, because that's what that's what matters to management. Okay. And then the pain points. All right. So I have had several people that do want to hear about all of them. So I'm going to really do like a quick run through. I'm not going to go into the individual slides for each, because I want to be able to answer all of these really great questions that I've got coming in. So let me do this. A risk avoidance versus meeting goals. So all about, how much can we mitigate? How much can we mitigate? How much can we reduce this risk? Versus, let's not focus so much on that, but what will it take for us to be able to meet our goals? Whether that's strategic goals, whether or not that's business goals, or even individual goals, right? We want to maintain that. It really comes down to risk centric versus objective centric. Big difference when it comes to that viewpoint. And once you change that, everything else will start really light bulb moments will start happening within the business. Okay, so we've talked about these other, so standard versus custom. So standard can be like, it's literally a repeatable process. It doesn't matter which organization did it. You can pretty much take it and say, this can go over here, and it can go and can be done over here. It can be done over there. Very standard practice. Very, I don't want to use predictable because I use it somewhere else, but repeatable, and able to be cloned. ERM is truly customized to every organization. I see it day in and day out with all of my clients. No ERM program looks exactly the same. Everyone has tailored elements to it, whether it's how they rate risks, how they have their conversations, how they feel best about gathering information. Do they work well with tech, or do they need more hand-holding, right? All of those practices look different. The other elements become very standard. Internal view versus 360-degree view. Internal means you're focused on risks that exist within the company, whether it's from a people perspective, our systems, our processes, all of those elements, very internal. The 360 means you're not just looking internal, you are looking external, and not just at one little segment, right? So look around the organization, look around at your competition, look around at non-competitors, and what are they experiencing? What's going on in other countries or other regions? Different elements, right? Look all the way around you. That's part of the reason, actually, I'll get to that one in just a second. About to jump ahead of myself, but definitely don't look so much internal. So if you think about from an insurance program perspective, they look at it from our workers' comp, right? We have all of the safety rules and everything like that. And even on the risk-centric side, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of operational risks end up being on the ERM register. So those types of elements. Individual versus connected. I mean, you could literally pick one risk out of a list and say, we looked at this one and this is what's assessed. This is why it's a priority. And they haven't done any look and analysis into, well, this one is actually connected to this risk over here, this risk over here. It's also going to impact, if this were to come into play, this program over here, this over here, right? There's so many connections that happen within risk management and enterprise risk management, but they don't get identified. Does it make it slightly more complicated? Yes. However, the bang is worth the buck, because management needs to understand that it's not a standalone. It is a bigger picture. They need to understand downstream and upstream and the spaghetti that sometimes happens with risk. Silo versus pervasive. So this is where both the risk itself and the risk management practices are very siloed within departments. So versus pervasive means it is spread out throughout the entire company. It doesn't matter which department you're looking at. They are doing really good enterprise risk management because they think about it as part of their mindset. And it's the pervasiveness of the practices span the company. Siloed could potentially be like, well, we do vendor risk management over here, TPRM. We do that over here. And we do cyber over here. We do financial risk management over here. We do compliance over here, but there's nothing really connecting any of that, right, to the bigger picture. All right, one-dimensional versus multi-dimensional. Usually it comes down to a lot of companies look at impact. Especially on the insurance side, they look at impact. That's what determines coverage amounts and deductibles and all that. But even in the old way of ERM, maybe you could get impact in there. I'm sorry, maybe you could get likelihood in there. But then there's other elements that go into it. And it's not just a one data point, right? That's what a lot of companies are doing, is they look at a single point of impact, a single point of likelihood, and where the two meet becomes the spot on the heat map. And the reality is that every risk has a range of impacts. Don't have to get fancy with it, but there is a range of impacts, and every impact value has a different probability of occurring. That's the reality, right? So management needs to know that. A lot of times there ends up being a mismatch in that assessment realm. Okay, so technical skills. Oh, all right. On the multidimensional, I also wanted to say I really advocate looking at velocity, possibly pervasiveness, not to use that word again, but how widespread is the risk across the organization? How big is it across there? You know, that really comes down to how many areas are impacted or how many projects, how many objectives, right? Depending on what you're looking at, the multidimensional there. Technical skills versus soft skills. I think up until probably 5 or so years ago, it was really thought enterprise risk management, and even traditional risk management, was very much technical knowledge oriented. As long as I get all the books on this risk thing called risk management, I'll be good to go. And it's really become apparent that you also have to have certain soft skills as well. You have to be a good listener. You have to be able to collaborate. You have to be able to facilitate a conversation. All those different pieces. And then predictable versus maintain buy-in. So predictable is you have a very standard routine. Everybody says, oh, yep, it's that time of year, time to talk to risk management about our risks, right? But we maintain on the ERM side, maintaining buy-in, because reality is you shouldn't be doing the same practices on that routine schedule, because otherwise, I mean, the organization's changing. So you have to be able to change with it. The environments around the organization is changing. You have to be able to change with it, which means you constantly have to maintain that buy-in, because if your practices aren't predictable, you're changing things on leadership, and change can be challenging. So, all right. Hopefully that was good for all of you guys on the quick overview. And we'll make sure that, because I did not include it here, I will make sure that when you get the follow-up email with the webinar recording, we can also provide you with the link to my blog, where I actually dive into all 10 of these and is the inspiration for this webinar. All right, so I want to answer some other questions that have come in. All right, so let's see here. Can I give some examples of how you have explained risk appetite and tolerance in business terms? Well, I think I did do that a little bit with, but here's what I will say is I tend to ask companies, how much are you possibly willing to gamble? You know, how much are you willing to lay on the table and risk losing, right? That's a good way to gauge appetite. I'm willing to throw this money in, and it's okay if I don't necessarily keep it all, right? So picture a gambling table. Some people may not like the casino, but it is a good example of, a project, a technology project, or, the company needs to allocate resources to something to achieve a goal. They're putting money on the table in the form of a project. They're allocating those resources. They'll know if that project is going to be successful. So they're willing to gamble that. The tolerance perspective, I actually break it down into two different pieces, because I break it down into tolerance and capacity. And the way that I've been able to do that really well with my clients is I ask them, and I'd like to use metrics, by the way. Performance metrics are best because they're already looking at those. So if you have a strategic plan at your organization, hopefully they have, well, what is an indicator of success? How will we know that we've achieved the goal that we've set for ourselves? If you haven't, hopefully you have an operational dashboard with KPIs in it. You can use those KPIs to gauge risk appetite and tolerance. You can say on there, okay, we're tracking where it is right now, where we want it to be, because we want it to go up. But our tolerance is, here's what I label as the threshold, right? Here is the level at which, if it starts approaching this level, we're going to start getting really nervous. And we need to start digging into why is it going this way? And go ahead and create an action plan that if it continues to get worse, we're going to be ready to pull the trigger on the action plan. And then you create the limit, which is, to me, represents capacity, right? This is the point of no return. It cannot reach this level. Otherwise, we are in dire straits. And you want to pull the trigger on that action plan before it reaches that level, right? Because always remember the KPIs are going to be historical data, right? They're not going to be leading indicators. They're going to be lagging indicators. So if it's reaching that limit, that means that's in the past. That's reached that limit. You're in trouble at this point. So you want to make sure it doesn't reach that limit. So that is how I would explain risk appetite and tolerance in business terms. Great question. Okay, so someone asked about scenario analysis, modeling, and data analytics. All right, so here is my stance on that. I think there is great need for doing scenario analysis. There's a line where it can be really great conversation that begins to lead to some very big aha moments for leadership. And then there's the data aspect to it. Hans Lasseau, formerly strategic risk manager for Lego Group, he published a book on, let's see, it was Prepare to Dare and then Decide to Succeed. So the second book. And the second book that he's got, Decide to Succeed, he does talk about how to get data from people when they feel like there's no hard data to support modeling and assessments. He walks you through that. So I would recommend going and getting that book. It's an easy read, thin book, easy read. So that is what I would recommend. From a modeling perspective, I also have an interview on my blog with Graham Keith on quantitative and modeling, and because he's a great math guy, modeling guy with ERM experience. And I'm comfortable with some numbers. I'm not a math geek by any stretch of the imagination. And we actually talk about during that interview. So if you go to my blog, just type in Graham Keith, and you'll be able to find the interview. But we talk about, if you're not a numbers person, how can you get comfortable with asking and talking about numbers? So I recommend checking out that interview. On the data analytics side, I will confess that I did, before going into ERM, I did do data analytics. So, however, it has been a while. Technology has changed. So my knowledge is probably a little outdated. However, I'm a firm believer that companies should be analyzing their data and the data of their business. That data can identify risks. However, I would also highly recommend using it, or at least using the analytics skill sets on the risk side, right? And I actually had a conversation earlier today with a client who they got asked a really good question, and I think it plays to this. So they were asked by their CEO, so we've got X number of risks. How do we know that we haven't left out something, right? And the answer to that is, well, we can't compare ourselves to other companies because every company is different and we all have different risks. However, we can look at it from a different perspective than what we have in the past, from a different lens. And then we'll take our data, put it through this other lens, and we'll see if there's any gaps, right? Maybe there's a few minor gaps, or there could be some major gaps. But the analytics perspective is a different story. So that is one element. The other piece is going back and using KRIs is what I would use, as the leading elements for risk monitoring. So there's different ways that data and analytics plays into risk management. I am not sure your modeling person to talk to. That's why I talk to people who are good at it, and I put their interviews on the blog. So I would highly check out that. So, all right. So I did have a question about how much budget is allocated for Fortune 500 companies as a benchmark towards risk management. Oh, don't ask an easy question. So here's what I will say is that every company, Fortune 500 or not, allocate and have different views towards how they do risk. It could be a centralized function or it could be a decentralized function, which makes budget comparisons a very difficult task, right? Because if you're centralized, then yes, you've got a great ERM team. They're all right here. You know exactly how much is being used. However, if they are decentralized, which I know of a number of companies that do this, they have one or two people at the high levels that are basically setting standards and doing the aggregation. But then you've got people that are truly dedicated to risk management practices that are spread out across the entire company, and that is all that they are responsible for, is leading the risk management practices within those different areas. But that means that the budgets for them and the training for them all get lost because it gets put into the different department budgets instead. So hate to not be able to expand on that answer. But it really does matter. Also depends on how fancy of a system from a tool perspective you want to go. When we were talking about tools earlier about the full-bodied, big company names versus the ones that are more mid-range versus the simplistic ones, it really does depend. Or if they end up building their own, right? So there's all these different factors that are really hard to gauge. As well as, I've got another one, another big question mark for budgets is the concept of, are we going to insource all of our skill sets and have a team that is a very well-rounded skill set that can do everything that we need from an ERM perspective? Or are we going to have a small lean team and we're going to outsource a lot? If you're going to outsource a lot, it's going to cost you. And so but some companies may like that because they want to keep up with the latest thing, or they want just the quote best practices access to consulting. So hope that helps. Let's see here. So trying to look and see what other questions. So we did talk about, okay, this is a good one. So taking into account all of these insights, how would you describe the ideal role of the risk manager? Oh, this is a good one. Okay, so the ideal role of a risk manager. So when I was director of ERM, we actually had a little sign that was up in our area that said, challenge assumptions and ask questions, right? That's what you're there to do. Because you do those two things to help inform management, help them gain additional insights. But ideal role, ideal role. Okay, I would say that the ideal role is someone who gets brought to the table by leadership and is actually a member of leadership there at every single decision that's getting made at the higher levels and how to allocate resources. When it's time for strategic planning, they are there, part of the conversation, not just as a regular leadership person at the table, but they're there to provide the ERM perspective and ask those questions and challenge those assumptions and able to do the role of a risk manager, facilitator, advisor. I tend to think of ERM within a company as an internal consulting firm. Okay. So you are an internal consultant. Your only client is your company, right? So how would you do that? If you put yourself in that perspective, it takes out the management aspect, and you're there to provide a perspective on enterprise risk. And then that's going to include strategic risk, most likely. But that is what you're meant to do. You're meant to facilitate conversation, bring the right people to the table, to have a role in an important conversation so that perspectives can be shared. Make sure that everybody's aware of the information they need to make a decision, with the ultimate outcome of increasing the confidence of being able to achieve an objective. That is the desired outcome for you as the ideal role. Let me know if that works for you, Carlos. Okay. So how do you change with an ERM system? All right. So if ERM is an ongoing practice that is going on within your organization and you get a system, it should become easier to manage all of the information, right? Now you've got history, you can track trends. It should be easier than trying to manage all of the on the fly Word documents, PowerPoints, different Excel files that are being maintained, sharing information. But there is a change management component to it, right? In which you need to make sure that people are on board. So you don't just go get a new system. Great. Tell your company, we're so excited, we've got a new system. We're going to send out a survey and we need you to fill it out. And that's what you do, right? You're going to need to do some hand holding in the beginning, get them comfortable with this idea of a system, and sit there with them when they get that first email or when they get the first request from you to go into the system, right? You create a new dashboard for them in the system. Fantastic. Sit down with them and watch them log in, get their perspective. Is that the right information that they need in the right way that's going to help them, right? We as risk managers, we think you need to receive the information in this way for it to be helpful, but we don't know that person's preferences. Maybe they're more of a text person, not a graph person. Okay, got to figure that out. Maybe they like getting just a straight up list instead of something fancy. Got to figure that out. So those are just different aspects. Nicolene, I hope that helps for you. So a question around what percentage in ERM is IT risk versus non-IT risks? So great question, Sanjeev. So here's what I would say to that is IT should be supporting the business, right? We recognize that in today's world, how technology reliant and dependent companies are to be able to operate. However, it should be a small percentage. One, because technically you guys have a whole IT department meant to properly manage risks. But typically you have specific IT risk or types of IT risk teams already built within the IT department. Cyber risk, all that good stuff, they're usually managing their own. So IT security, all that good stuff. It goes back to being objective centric, and maybe you have IT risks that are a technology risk that is a risk to achieving an objective. Okay, we need to capture that. If it's more like the operational day-to-day, elements of we're not checking user access and things like that, that doesn't belong in the big realm of objectives. Yeah. So hopefully that helps. So it should be a small percentage when it comes down to the objective centric ERM. Okay, so I have this one super specific question. Our board of governors constantly wants to fuss with and change our organization's risk appetite. How can we as risk practitioners help our boards be comfortable with setting higher value / higher risk appetite they don't back out of when the stuff starts to hit the fan? So giving them scenarios would be the answer that I would give you. So as you're developing risk appetites, give them scenarios. And what would they do in that event? Um, Also, to be honest, that is where modeling would come in handy, right? Be able to show the projected impacts and everything on the organization, and you put into play what those risk appetites are. Um, but the reality too is that management should be setting the risk appetite. Um, Now, every organization is different. And it sounds like board of governors means they have more oversight than like a board of directors. So if they do have a hand in the actual day to day, then it does get a little different. But typically, if it's a board of directors, they're there to make sure the company is being managed appropriately, which means management setting the risk appetite and um, and it becomes more of a we're sharing what we've set with you for awareness. Um, but if it is that your board has more of a hands-on, sometimes you can ask yourself, is that what's required, or is that just what they're comfortable with? Right? It may be time for a change and how that's being done. So hopefully that helps, Jess. Um, okay, so um, I've got some really great questions here. We don't have enough time. All right, let me jump into a couple more before we wrap up here. So, got a really great question on ideas to grow risk culture in a newly formed business unit. Okay, so risk culture. All right. So, from that perspective, it really comes down to um, one of the pieces is really thinking about risk awareness. Um, So we want to help management be very risk aware. And that is risk culture, right? Also the sharing of how do we take our personal biases that we bring to the workplace and say, well, I may prefer to do this as an individual. Is that what's going to work for this organization or this business unit, right? The business unit has wants to do these things, and that's going to take me outside of my comfort zone. But you know what? It's what management has set, and my role is to support management. Still ask questions, right? We're not blindly following, but we want to know what is my role going to be in helping to achieve that objective. And sometimes that means my role is asking good questions, making sure that we are aware of potential risks. And if management says, yes, we're aware, we're comfortable with this, then we say, okay, that's great. Just want to make sure. And we move on, right? So hopefully that helps, Mark. There was also a really great question on how to kind of break into risk management. What's needed? Do you need a degree? Do you need experience? Is there certain education? Which is a great question. So in the ERM space, people come from all walks. You have people from IT that move into ERM. You have people that are finance people that move in. You've got operations, all kinds of places. So no direct experience is needed, to be honest. You're bringing your knowledge and your perspectives to the table. Some organizations prefer that you have a specific degree. Usually they've gotten to where they will substitute experience for a degree. So there's that. There are schools that do offer degrees in enterprise risk management, that types of things. I have a master's in risk management and insurance. That was for two reasons. One, I knew at that time, especially, I was within the insurance industry at a carrier, but there was this one little class that had ERM in it, and that's what got me interested, right? So beyond that, it's been all experience for myself, but again, learning mindset. Um, from an education perspective, will be a really great segue in just one moment. But from a degree, my one caveat on like formal degrees, bachelor's, master's, things like that, even in the ERM space, is they're not going to be up on the latest trends because that's a university, right? It's going to take time for them to update materials in the curriculum, things like that. unless you go to um, a like a I know there's several organizations that have chief risk officer programs, right? Usually certificates will be a good way. Going to conferences and seminars will be another way. Doing your own reading. This is not a plug for myself, but just as more of an awareness. If you didn't hear earlier, I do have my blog that I've been publishing for 8 years now, over 300 articles out there on enterprise risk management and strategy. So Google something, it's most likely going to be talking about it. If not, find me on LinkedIn, shoot me a note that you would like to see an article on a certain topic. We'll see what we can do, and maybe you just didn't find it, and I can shoot you a link to it. So all good there. So from that perspective, let me really kind of segue on the education side. UCLA has I'm going to scroll through this real quick. UCLA has an ERM certificate program that if you want, you can use this as a great pathway to getting a REMS CRMP, Certified Risk Management Professional designation. UCLA Extension, it's foundations, implementing a program, advanced techniques, and then an ethics and crisis management class. So 4 classes taught every quarter. The URL is right down here. Sarah and Enrique that are here, you can drop a note in the Q&A if you have questions about the program. They are more than happy. And so I have been asked to share the link to my blog. So, the blog that I mentioned, okay, so which specific interview? We'll do that in just one second. So, sorry, got distracted. UCLA Extension. So go out there, check it out. Just at full disclosure, I am an instructor for their ERM Advanced Techniques course. So don't also look at it and see based on your level of experience. You know, I saw people that have 10, 15, 20 years of ERM experience. I don't need the foundations piece unless you really want to get the whole certificate. If you are just interested in a specific course, you can take just one course at a time. Talk to Sarah and Enrique, and they can kind of direct you in the right path. But yeah, that would be really good. All right, so there's that. We have 3 more minutes. I wanted to go ahead and chat about that. You can see the link down here. And there was one other thing. Oh, I guess they do have the courses in the quarter. So please check that out. We had another great question. We got 3 minutes left. I'm going to answer this question, then we'll wrap up. So how do you overcome biases in risk management? And that is a really, really good question. So biases in risk management, I actually have an article on biases. And it talks about, there's a long list of types of biases. So it does depend on which type of bias that you're talking about. Some of it, but some of the most prevalent ones will show up during risk assessments, where people are overly confident in their current management of a risk. The things that they're doing, they're great at managing the risk. So it's a really low risk, right? There's that. Or as they're assessing it, they're going based on that gut instinct. So you have to weigh, do you want to just rely on one person for a risk assessment, or would you be better off? So as an example, do you rely on one person, which potentially has bias in their assessment, or do you want to get an assessment on the same risk from multiple people and see where people land? That is definitely, as an example, one way to overcome bias. The other way is also the questions that you ask. When you ask them in a certain order and in a certain way, you get people thinking differently, right? And some of that can come from the repetition of some of the ERM practices. When you're doing the same thing over and over and over again, it becomes very predictable, and people just become rote in their responses. But if you change it up, it makes them stop and think. So, you guys, this has been a phenomenal piece. Oh, so sorry, somebody asked about the name of the book and author again. That would be Decide to Succeed by Hans Lassault. It is available on Amazon for those. I do ask for one favor as we wrap up, and that is, can you please scan this and answer 2 questions? It'll take 30 seconds of your time. Would be greatly, greatly appreciated. I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation today. Even if you guys couldn't talk to me, you talked to me in the Q&A, which was fantastic. Really enjoyed it, and look forward to doing this again. So please don't forget the QR code, please. Take that 30 seconds and be watching for the email from UCLA Extension with the recording from the webinar and any follow-up that you may need. So, and we will include a couple of the blog articles that I mentioned as well. So thank you guys very much. And feel free to reach out on me on LinkedIn if you haven't already. Happy to connect there as well. All right. Take care, guys.